If you're ready to feel like you're 1 foot in the ground, I'm here to deliver the news that Five Nights at Freddy's is turning 10 years old this month. Now, I know when I talk like this, people much older than me in the audience groan, but seriously, FNAF 1 is an entire decade old. A 10-year-old game in 2014 was Halo 2 on Xbox, and games like that feel pretty ancient these days. What can you say? Time flies when you're having fun. But anyway, I don't know if this seems like an out of left field turn for me, but yeah, Five Nights at Freddy's is 10 years old and I wanted to talk about it. That begs the question, what on earth would I want to say about this game that hasn't already been said in the decades worth of videos that have been made on this one? And the answer is, I don't know. I thought it'd be fun to give this game a revisit, and so here we are. Five Nights at Freddy's is one of those games that became an overnight phenomenon and is still a marketing powerhouse to this day. A full live-action film adaptation was just released for it last year, as a matter of fact. I thought it was kind of terrible, but it was a smash hit and a sequel is on the way. But what I find fascinating about such explosively popular games, especially from independent developers, is that before all that, before the endless supply of sequels, remasters, ports, plushies, action figures, novelizations, and film adaptations, there was just one game. Released to the world in August of 2014 with next to no fanfare. A game on the radar of almost nobody that absolutely dominated the internet within a couple of months of its release. I'm sure you can see why I'd find it interesting to make a video out of my replaying this game now that it's hit such a big milestone. It can be fun to go back to a simpler time and experience the game for the first time again and see how good it actually was in hindsight. I say for the first time again because I have dabbled with this game before. I can explain it in much more detail later, but I was 13 going on 14 when this game came out. While I was definitely more on the cringe hipster side of things at that time, this game didn't escape my radar as all my favorite YouTube personalities talked about it because it was the hot game of the year. I have played it, but never got very far because I preferred watching other people play it. And do you know why? Because this game is fucking scary. I had next to no horror interest or exposure back then, so I didn't get very far. But nowadays, I love scary games. See my various Resident Evil videos to hear all about it. So I thought it'd be really fun to give this game the old college try and beat the Five Nights, having not really paid attention to or touched this game in years. Amongst proper horror fans, FNAF 1 is kind of infamous because it has the reputation for being a jump scare oriented game. With that, I would like to mention that I don't plan on tossing a random jump scare on the screen with the ear-piercing noise that comes with that, because that routine's been done before, but also, I had the face cam on for my first session of footage, but I'm not the kind of person who really emotes with their face, especially when playing games. I thought the game was absolutely terrifying, but my face is pretty determined most of the time. And I also forgot to turn the microphone on, so the one jump I had wasn't captured. Anyway, as I'm sure you know, you play as a dude named Mike Schmidt at his new job. The nighttime security guard at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. But the Chuck E. Cheese-esque animatronic characters, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, come to life at night and try to kill you. Your job is to learn their various patterns and find a way to avoid them all. I think it's a great premise for a game, and calling it a jump scare fest is pretty reductive. The game doesn't revel in tossing random jump scares at you, and the jump scares themselves aren't even graphic or gratuitous, it's just the failure state when you get caught or lose power. Instead, the real dread comes from the time before you die. This game capitalizes on anticipation anxiety. You can clearly see on the cameras that these robotic children's mascots are gradually making their way to your office with the intent to kill you. And despite what you're told on the phone, they're definitely out to get you specifically since they often look into the cameras directly. But at the beginning, you don't know what the patterns are and how it will happen, so trying to manage all that is scary. It's a totally valid approach to horror design, tapping into real emotional fear as, at least, I felt super tense while playing Night 1. And that's just speaking as someone who has seen this game beaten multiple times. Even if it was a long time ago, there are still things I knew to expect and remembered about it. But being in the game and reacting to things as they come up is totally different from watching it be played. I think that would be quadrupled back when the game came out when people didn't know the exact strategies. Fear comes from the unknown, and this game thrives on that, which makes it terrifying at the beginning. On the first night, the phone guy will offer some comfort as he teaches you the basic mechanics while the animatronics are completely deactivated until 2 a.m. But these calls get less useful each night. In fact, they become useless by night 3 as he tells you to play dead if caught, which means absolutely nothing.
Try playing dead. You know, go limp. Then there's a chance that maybe they'll think that you're an empty costume instead. Then again, if they think you're an empty costume, they might try to stuff a metal skeleton into you. I wonder how that would work.
and the machines start operating at midnight. Then the guy gets killed on night 4.
Yeah, I always wondered what was in all those empty heads back there. Oh no.
Leaving you totally alone at night 5. When you first start playing, you don't know where Bonnie and Chica are going to come from, or how Foxy operates, or why you can hear Freddy's music in the distance sometimes, or why he's laughing, or when to expect the "It's me" text to flash on the screen. You're completely defenseless. All you can do is turn the lights on, and if you see a monster, you shut the door. But using the lights, the cameras, and the doors all consume power, and if you run out, you're almost guaranteed to die. These incredibly simple gameplay mechanics really hold up and carry the experience. For starters, the controls are very easy to pick up and play. You move the mouse to look from one side of the room to the other and click on the buttons to use the lights or the doors. And then you move the mouse to the icon in the bottom to pull up the camera and click around to see each feed. And that's basically it. But the simple mechanics work so well because the game squeezes as much depth out of them as it can. Because the game is all about resource management and strategy. As the nights go on and you die and need to try again, you realize that Bonnie only comes from the left and Chica from the right, and that watching them on the cameras is a waste of power because they can get around quickly. The only thing you need to do to stop them is to check the lights on either side of the room. They can only attack when the camera is up though, which might give you the idea that you can sit here idly to ensure you don't die, but Foxy makes a mad dash for you if you don't check the cameras enough, so you have to stay active to win at all times. But that process drains power, which you also need to stay alive. So it's a very active playing process where every decision you make is to stay alive, but each one has a potential risk attached to it. Identifying patterns and becoming better at the game is really rewarding. For example, when you hear plates rumbling, that means Chica is in the kitchen, allowing you to check on the right side of the hallway less for a bit. But not too long, because then she might get in and kill you. The Freddy music means he's in the kitchen. His laugh indicates that he's moved from one room to another. But that's the thing though. All these strategies are pretty well documented by this point. The game is simple, after all. It didn't take long for people to find out how the game operated and to create strategies to react to it. If you're a fan of this game, you undoubtedly know all the strategies or have seen them used in a Let's Play. But what you don't realize by watching people play the game is just how addicting it was and still is. Speaking as someone who only fully played through it for the first time in 2024. The game is really immersive. You wouldn't expect that praise for a game that looks so simple, but whenever I played, I got really lost in the atmosphere. Since the game utilizes sound so heavily, it's best to give the game your undivided attention. Doing so increased the tension because while you sit here, your only background noise is this distorted clown music and the sound of electronic humming from the fans and the lights and the static of the cameras. Broken up by whatever sounds the animatronics make, like footsteps in the distance, or Foxy humming, or Freddy laughing. It's an atmosphere that really works at sucking you in and feeling as defenseless as the player character. But then, looking at the game mechanics, identifying patterns is satisfying, as I said. Minimizing power usage gives you something to focus on throughout the night. But the game would get really boring if it was totally predictable and identifying strategies was all you had to do. That's where the luck element comes in, which is the final piece of the puzzle that makes this game so mesmerizing. That sounds like the opposite of what would be true in most other games. In fact, I've complained about other games that utilize luck as a factor in the design before, like say Mega Man X5 or X6, but the way FNAF uses it alongside the aforementioned simple mechanics just really hits a lot differently. But before describing how, I'll give you examples of what I mean. On night 2, Bonnie showed up at my door and would not leave for what felt like an entire hour, draining precious power, and I died. On one of my night 3 attempts, I got 2 Foxy attacks, which drains more power each time he shows up to bang on the door, so that one led to a death. I got an unbelievable Golden Freddy attack on another night 3 attempt, and if that happens, it crashes the game, forcing a restart. And then, when I got to night 4, things were going well until Foxy attacked on one side and Freddy was on the other, so I needed both doors closed, and that drains power like nothing else. Success is the perfect combination of knowing how to win, but also reacting to the random stuff that can happen. The more strats you learn, the more in control you are in your battle against the RNG. For example, on night 4, I kind of just ignored Freddy, which in hindsight is why I died as many times as I did. My approach by night 4 was just checking the lights for Bonnie and Chica and checking the camera for Foxy, which works in the earlier nights because Freddy is almost non-existent then. On night 4, I knew to count how many laughs he did, so I knew when he was outside my door and I'd shut it until he went back into the hall. That strategy barely allowed me to win, but it would not cut it on night 5. So I looked it up and found that Freddy's progress is halted by keeping a constant eye on him on the camera, and that you don't need to look at Foxy, just opening the camera at all stalls his movement. But doing this quickly enough while also keeping an eye on the other two and then going back to the cams to stop Freddy was such a balancing act that night 5 took me like over 10 tries. This would get super boring or frustrating if the game were really long, but one night is only about 9 minutes of playtime. You can beat this game in under 90 minutes if you get lucky. But like I said, learning the strats greatly increases your chances. Every time I died on night 5, usually towards the end, I wouldn't be pissed off. I'd be absolutely determined to get back in there and execute on what I knew to the best of my ability to try and win. Victory always felt like it was right in my grasp, as I could usually make it to 5 AM but never had enough power to make it to 6. Maybe this won't be true for everyone, but for me, I was completely hooked on trying to beat it because I knew I could. Until about 2 or 3 AM, you think you've got it in the bag, but then something could happen that drains power unexpectedly and you're left crossing your fingers and hoping to make it to 6 AM. In fact, that's how I won in the end. On my successful night 5 attempt, I made it to 5 AM and the power went out. And when this happens, Freddy will show up and play his music, and how long it takes from then to his killing you is completely random. And in that time, you might actually make it to 6 AM, and that is what happened to me, and it was super cathartic to win like that. Sure, the game loses some of its mystique when you know the strategies to win, and you don't get to soak up the atmosphere of the various cameras as much, but the utter dread still exists towards the beginning of the game, and on the later nights, I was carried by a determination to win in a very arcadey kind of way, keep trying over and over again until you conquer the game. I thought it was really fun. And despite the title, the game doesn't end at night 5. You then unlock night 6, where poor Mike tries to earn some overtime. But this is a little much for me, seeing as I got killed before it hit 1 AM. I thought I was done at night 5, but then the next day I felt like coming back to night 6 to continue trying. I mean it no exaggeration that this game is really addicting. Beating night 6 unlocks the custom night where you can program the difficulty of the animatronics yourself, and the ultimate challenge is setting them all to 20, their max. This is absolutely way too difficult for me since Freddy will be outside of your office in like 10 seconds, and that's too much stress for me to keep up with. I got Mike his $120, that's more than enough. They couldn't pay me that to keep this job for 5 seconds, let alone 5 nights. But that's basically all there really is to this game. Yeah, like I said, this is not a complicated game by any means, but I thought it was really good. The gameplay here isn't substantive enough to where you'd want to replay it over and over for years. I think it's probably more of a one-and-done kind of game, but it's an enjoyable one-and-done game. It only costs $5 on Steam, and with that purchase, you get a game with creepy vibes, easy to pick up and play gameplay, strategy, resource management, and enough luck to get an addicting gameplay loop. I think that lack of complexity makes Five Nights 1 a game I could recommend to anybody. Five Nights 1 was the only game in the series I played at all back when these games first came out, and I largely stopped following them after the 4th or 5th one. I never played any of them past part 1 because, in an effort to up the ante, each game would have a lot more stuff going on for you to react to, and it just looked like it would fry my brain to even try them. And then the story also became so popular in the games that after several sequels, I lost the plot and stopped paying attention to the series. However, FNAF 1 is still an easy revisit for both story and gameplay. The game's setup at the time of its release was simply that you were a dude working at a job that had much more than he bargained for. Easy to understand and leads to the gameplay which thrives off of its lack of complexity for the brief campaign. But then, the game allowed for such lively community because of how mysterious the game's world was. Making a scary game based on restaurant animatronics is a great idea because almost every Gen Xer or Millennial or even Zoomer remembers going to a place like Chuck E. Cheese as a kid and seeing these robots that are uncanny enough to be totally scary in a different context. I got an uncle into this game on the premise alone back when it was new. But then, in-universe, there's a dark mystery to follow, as it's mentioned that there was a bite of 87 where some poor kid lost their frontal lobe at the hands of these mechanical monstrosities. That immediately gives these uncanny robots much more scare factor than they already had because you don't know what they're capable of. Some of the later games really tried to make the robots scarier on purpose, but the uncanny nature of the ones in this game capture that Chuck E. Cheese atmosphere the best, and are thus the scariest in the series, if you ask me. But again, back to the story, sometimes posters on the wall will change into these news clippings about missing kids at the restaurant and how the previous location had to be shut down because of a foul odor problem coming from the animatronics. Five Nights 1 doesn't have much story in the actual game, but these details were enough to get people talking about it and building a community around the game. Like, were these machines possessed by the souls of the deceased? And what's up with Golden Freddy? And what was the bite of 87? Back in 2014, we didn't know any of that, so it made the game extra mysterious. And that's what makes Five Nights 1 such a fascinating game to assess from a historical perspective. It absolutely changed the gaming landscape despite being such a basic game comprised of mostly static images and basic animations, whenever you actually have an animation, that is. The kind of people who hate popular stuff might not want to acknowledge this, but history has shown that this game is obviously not some gimmick that people swept under the rug after they were done with it. It's a landmark title in the history of video games because of its almost unrivaled impact on games. There were successful independent games before Five Nights at Freddy's, but this game and franchise quickly became one of the biggest. It revolutionized indie horror games as it spawned a generation of imitators, and above all else, this game was a landmark title in terms of the synergy between gaming, YouTube, and becoming an overnight hit. There were big games on YouTube before 2014, but I don't think there was a hit quite like this back then. As I mentioned before, this game was made by one guy, Scott Cawthon, and released to absolutely no fanfare. But it rose to all-star prominence because of YouTube. On August 12, 2014, the YouTuber Markiplier uploaded, "Warning, scariest game in years." And at time of recording, this video has 119 million views.
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier and welcome to Five Nights at Freddy's, an indie horror game that you guys suggested en masse, and I saw that Yami Mash played it and he said it was really good.
This video and the other LP channels like Jacksepticeye and Game Grumps playing it gave it a hype wave like never before seen. Then, The Game Theorist, which was already a popular channel, rose to new heights by cornering the market on Five Nights at Freddy's story discussion, building such immense hype around the game that the release of Five Nights 2 just a couple of months after the first one was massive, turning this from a fascinating indie horror game into a global phenomenon as more and more people kept making careers out of playing this game on the internet and nearly pissing themselves from all the jump scares. Today, a game rising to prominence from YouTube isn't new. We've now seen Undertale, Fortnite, Among Us, Fall Guys, and so on, but as established, I think Five Nights at Freddy's was really something special in that history. And that's how I got into it, and where most of my nostalgia for this game comes from. I loved watching Markiplier play these games and learn the strats and conquer custom night on each game, and seeing other YouTubers that like to do the same. I remember when the game theory on Five Nights 2 came out like it was yesterday. Seeing the lore, as primitive as it was back then, it was still really fascinating to watch as he deduced Five Nights 2 was actually a prequel.
Call me the Phantom Menace, cause every way to Sunday, this game is a prequel.
Everyone at school also thought so as they'd listen to the MatPat videos on the bus at full volume and at lunchtime, and everybody would gather around somebody's iPad watching them play the game. Even though I fell off with interest as time went on, I'm always going to remember that era where this game captured YouTube really fondly. It's just crazy that it was a fucking decade ago. It's also nice to see that this game was a cool rags to riches story. Scott Cawthon, the creator, has been a controversial figure in terms of beliefs and what causes he spends money on, but in the interest of staying positive, I think his story is inspiring at least. He was working retail while making this game on the side, providing for his family, but one of his games got made fun of for looking like scary animatronics, and then he makes this game as a response to that critique, and the next thing you know, he's a multimillionaire built off the back of a super creative idea and a fun game. That's inspiring stuff, especially if you're someone working in the indie space. Indie games started becoming more mainstream in the late 2000s and early 2010s, and I think this game was no doubt a part of that. So when looking back at this game 10 years later, I'm impressed by all that's come of this franchise since then. I don't think it was a fad. I think it was a cool, creative concept that became an instantly recognizable IP, and the game that started it all was well worth the $5 asking price. I had fun revisiting this game, I really did. Now, if you guys thought this was a good video, I'd certainly be willing to go back to at least Five Nights 2 and 3 for their 10th anniversaries, but like I said, those games seemed well above my pay grade in complexity and difficulty, but if people want to see it, I'm down to give it a try. But in the meantime, I thought this video would be a fun break from my usual stuff, but that's all I really have to say on this game, so I'll wrap it up. If you made it this far into the video, I'll say what I always do. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.